My name is Rachel Quinn, and 10 years ago, my name was still on the glass wall outside the office I helped build from nothing. I was the co-founder, the strategist, the one clients called when things were on fire. That morning, I walked into a boardroom expecting to review our Q2 projections, not to be erased from the very company I had poured my life into. Ethan didn't even stand when I entered. He just looked up from a folder, barely meeting my eyes. "We've decided to move forward without you, Rachel." My ears rang. He said it like we were discussing reorganizing a storage closet, not tearing down 12 years of blood, sweat, and missed birthdays. I blinked, trying to process. "The team feels your priorities have shifted. You've been distracted." Distracted. The word cut sharper than anything else. I'd been flying back and forth between New York and Chicago to take care of my mother after her Parkinson's diagnosis. I worked from hospital rooms, conference calling into pitch meetings, and editing slide decks from plastic chairs by her bedside. He pushed a slim envelope across the table. A severance offer, 2 months' salary, a non-compete clause. And that's when I realized it wasn't just Ethan sitting on this. There were others. Our CFO, our head of operations, and Claire, my best friend, the woman who stood beside me the day we signed our first lease. She sat with her arms folded, not looking at me. I tried to speak, but my throat closed. I turned to Claire, searching for anything in her expression that might explain this. Her eyes flicked toward me, then quickly away. I felt the room tilt. My voice cracked. "When did this happen?" "When you were in Chicago last week," Ethan said, while I was at Mom's neurologist appointment, texting the team updates on a new branding concept. Claire had replied with a heart emoji. That was the last thing she ever sent me. When I walked out, Pat from security was waiting near the elevator. I'd just brought cookies to his daughter's school fundraiser a month earlier. He couldn't meet my gaze either. As I stepped into the hallway, heads turned and then quickly looked down. I didn't cry. Not until I reached the lobby and realized my keycard no longer worked. Downstairs, the receptionist handed me a cardboard box. Inside were a few framed photos, my favorite coffee mug, and a plant I hadn't watered in weeks. I stepped outside into the bright sunlight, blinking like I'd just woken from a nightmare. My name was gone from the office door. Someone had already peeled the vinyl letters off. I sat on the curb for 20 minutes, trying to breathe. Everything I'd worked for, everything I thought was mine, had been stolen while I was holding my mother's hand. That was the day I learned something brutal. Success doesn't protect you from betrayal. Sometimes, it just makes the knife sharper. The first week after I was let go, I told myself it was just a setback. I polished my resume, updated my portfolio, and started making calls. Old clients, contacts from conferences, people who used to greet me with enthusiasm now paused, gave vague excuses, and passed me off to assistants who never followed up. At first, I thought it was timing. Maybe they were busy, maybe they were unsure. But after the 5th unanswered email and the 3rd awkward silence on a call, I started to feel something colder, something calculated. One former client finally told me the truth. Word had spread that I'd breached contracts, that I was unstable, that I couldn't be trusted. I was stunned. These were lies, fabricated and planted. I hadn't taken a single client list, hadn't even touched a confidential file. But it didn't matter. In our industry, reputation is currency, and mine had just crashed. Interviews stopped. Even staffing agencies stopped responding. I held out for a few more weeks, but the silence grew louder. I sold my car. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The rent on my downtown apartment was due, and my savings were shrinking fast. I packed my things and moved to a studio above a laundromat on the far edge of the city. It smelled like detergent, and the windows stuck. But it was all I could afford. Dinner turned into cup noodles and crackers. I stopped looking at my phone because I couldn't handle the notifications that never came. I took a few odd jobs. Writing web copy for a local locksmith. Editing brochures for a dog trainer. Nothing with a title. Nothing that felt like who I used to be. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie on a secondhand mattress, staring at the ceiling, remembering what it felt like to walk into boardrooms where my name meant something. Now, I didn't even recognize myself in the mirror. The sharp suits were gone. The confidence had cracked. But I still woke up every morning, not because I believed anything would change, just because I didn't know what else to do. I clung to a quiet hope, buried deep under all the fear, that somehow this wasn't the end. I didn't know it then, but I was already learning how to survive without a safety net. I just hadn't figured out yet what I was going to build with it. My mother's funeral was quiet. A handful of distant relatives, a few neighbors, and the priest who had known her since I was a teenager. I stood alone at the graveside, watching the casket being lowered into the ground, feeling like I had been buried right along with her. She was the only person who never doubted me, even in those final months when I was barely holding it together. As I sat in the motel room that night, still wearing black, I looked around at my life. No job, no savings, no direction. And for the first time, I stopped pretending I could fix it by getting back what I lost. Something cracked open inside me, but it wasn't pain. It was resolved. I wasn't going to beg anyone for a seat at their table anymore. If no one wanted me, I'd build my own damn table. The next morning, I walked down to a small laundromat near my apartment and asked the owner if I could help improve his signage. I didn't ask for money. I asked for laundry credit. Then I did the same thing at the pet supply store on the next block, and a tired-looking coffee shop 2 streets over. I offered to rework their flyers, help with in-store events, and redo their social posts. In return, they gave me sandwiches, cleaning supplies, and a place to sit with Wi-Fi after hours. I applied the same principles I used back when I pitched to major corporations, but instead of focusing on market segments or digital funnels, I focused on people. I helped the laundromat add a community corkboard. The coffee shop started hosting Sunday open mics. The pet store ran a loyalty program with handwritten thank you cards. Nothing fancy, but it worked. Customers noticed. They told their friends. They came back. And slowly, those business owners started talking about me, not as the fallen exec, but as the woman who made things better. No logo, no agency name, just me, showing up and doing the work. For the first time in months, I felt like I mattered again. Not because someone said I was important, but because I created something useful. I wasn't rebuilding my career. I was redefining what it meant to have one. And that shift, quiet as it was, changed everything. The businesses I started helping couldn't afford agencies, but they had something better. They had heart. They cared about their customers, their neighborhoods, and their stories. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something that actually mattered. I worked out of back rooms and borrowed storage spaces. I shared tables with cafe owners during slow afternoons, sketching ideas on napkins. We came up with small campaigns that felt human. The hardware store started a local hero Saturday, spotlighting customers who volunteered in the community. A little boutique ran a Customer of the Month wall, complete with Polaroids and handwritten thank yous. There was no ad budget, no PR agency, no glossy brochures. But word spread. Customers noticed the difference, and they talked about it. Not online, but in line at the grocery store, at PTA meetings, while waiting for their dry cleaning. Each success, no matter how small, felt like a brick in something solid. These weren't just clients. They became my tribe. We were a network of people who had been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. Together, we were proving that connection could be a strategy, that honesty could be a brand. I didn't make much money. Some weeks, I barely scraped by. But for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. I wasn't chasing status. I was building relationships. And those relationships became the foundation for everything that came next. The email came late one Thursday evening. It was from Lisa Chen, a marketing director I hadn't spoken to in years. We'd worked together back when I still had a corner office and a staff of 20. She was now at a mid-sized retail chain that was losing ground fast. She didn't dance around the issue. Her team was struggling. Sales were down. The board was pressing for a turnaround. And her CEO was considering bringing in my old firm. She'd remembered the way I used to work, the way I found human insight in data points. She asked if I'd be willing to pitch a proposal. Not because of nostalgia, she said, but because she needed results. I sat with the message for a long time. This wasn't just any account. This was one of the biggest regional players still within my former company's orbit. Winning it wouldn't just be a project. It would be a message. But I didn't let that cloud my thinking. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here to build. I said yes, but only if I could speak directly to the decision makers. No intermediaries, no politicking, just the work. Lisa agreed. A date was set. I pulled my team together. It was small but tight. Everyone was scrappy, smart, and knew what we were up against. We didn't talk about the past. We focused on the pitch. Real problems. Real customers. Real solutions. Deep down, I knew this was the first real moment where I could be seen again. Not as someone who had been pushed out, but as someone who had risen above. And if I played it right, it wouldn't be about beating anyone. It would be about reminding the industry what real value looked like. I arrived 20 minutes early, portfolio in hand, heart steady. The building was quiet, modern, and glass everywhere. My name was on the visitor list, my meeting room reserved. I nodded to the receptionist, smiled, and made my way to the lobby restroom to compose myself. That's when I saw them through the conference room glass. Ethan, Claire, and Jared, my former team, seated with their sleek slide decks and smug confidence. For a split second, my stomach twisted. Not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it. They were here to pitch, too. Same client. Same opportunity. But I didn't flinch. I adjusted my collar, walked past the room without making eye contact, and waited for my turn. When they called me in, Lisa greeted me warmly. The rest of the executive team was polite, curious. I started with a quiet question. What do your customers say about you when no one's listening? That shifted the energy. I didn't open with numbers or buzzwords. I opened with stories. Photos I'd taken at 5 of their stores. Notes I'd written from customer conversations. Moments where their team had gone above and beyond. Unnoticed, but not unappreciated. They leaned in. I showed them that their strength wasn't pricing or product variety. It was people. It was a local presence. It was small, human things that no algorithm could measure. Ethan had spoken earlier about scale and automation. I spoke about trust, about how loyalty isn't built in ad impressions but in real-world experience. By the time I finished, no one was checking their phones. The room was quiet, thoughtful. When they thanked me, I didn't look toward the glass wall. I didn't need to. I knew who was watching, and I knew what they were thinking. This wasn't just a pitch. It was a reminder. I hadn't just survived. I'd evolved. The call came 2 days later. Lisa's voice was calm but warm. The board had chosen us, not just for the pilot, but for the entire campaign. I thanked her, stayed composed, and promised we'd deliver. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a minute. No cheering, no fist pumps, just a long breath and a quiet moment of gratitude. Word spread quickly. A small cafe chain called the next day. Then, a regional bookstore group. One by one, the people who once didn't return my calls were now asking when I could meet. Not because I'd won a pitch, but because the way I worked was resonating. It felt real. It felt different. It felt like what marketing was always supposed to be. My team was small, mostly young professionals whom no one else had hired. Some were fresh out of college, some were career shifters, but every one of them believed in what we were doing. They weren't there to climb ladders. They were there to build something that mattered. We didn't talk about Ethan or the past. We didn't have to. Our results spoke for us. And for me, that was enough. I didn't need to prove anyone wrong anymore. I just had to keep proving myself right. Winning wasn't the point. Doing it our way was. And that made all the difference. It came on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was reviewing campaign reports with my team when my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in years. I hesitated before answering. It was Ethan. His voice was polished as always, but the usual confidence had been replaced by something strained. He congratulated me on our recent work, mentioned the press coverage, and then cut to the point. His firm was in trouble. They had lost 3 major clients in 6 months. Their retention numbers were tanking, and investor confidence was evaporating. He wanted to meet, not just to catch up, but to discuss a potential merger. He said we had complementary strengths. Together, we could stabilize the market. What he really meant was that my name could fix what his leadership had broken. I didn't react. I told him I'd consider it. And I invited him, along with his partners, to meet me at our office the following week. I could almost hear the surprise in his pause. He expected me to come to him. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. The day of the meeting, we made no special arrangements. No flowers, no catering, just our team, our work, and the walls lined with campaign case studies, built from scratch. When they walked in, Ethan tried to act casual, as if the past hadn't happened. But I could see it in their eyes. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a plea. They made their pitch. A merger, brand unification, shared resources. I listened quietly. When they finished, I thanked them. Then stood. What you need, I said, isn't a merger. You don't need my name. You need a lesson in relevance. You need to unlearn everything that stopped working 5 years ago. They sat frozen. I wasn't angry. I wasn't gloating. I was calm, clear, and certain. I offered them an alternative. A consulting partnership. For a fee, we would rebuild their strategy from the ground up. They didn't respond right away, but in their silence, I saw it. The truth they hadn't said out loud. They didn't want to learn from me, but now, they had no other choice. And this time, I was the one setting the terms. I gave them 48 hours to decide. No pressure, just facts. I handed them a consulting proposal with exact terms. Monthly retainer, performance-based incentives, full public disclosure that they were working with us to redesign their client strategy. At first, they pushed back, said it was excessive, said it would damage their image. I let them talk. A week later, after losing yet another account and staring down their worst quarter in years, I got the email. They accepted. I wasn't surprised. Desperation has a way of clarifying priorities. And for the first time, they were forced to admit that what I offered wasn't just different. It was necessary. Over the next 12 months, my team guided them through a complete transformation. We restructured their messaging, rebuilt their client engagement plans from the ground up, taught them the same principles they once dismissed as too soft, too niche, too sentimental. The irony wasn't lost on me. They paid on time, took the notes, followed our lead. There were no thank you speeches, no apologies, just a silent acknowledgement, contract by contract, that they had finally come full circle. And I led every session with the same focus I brought to the businesses that trusted me when I had nothing. Professional, steady, committed to the work. On the final day of our engagement, Ethan asked for a private meeting. We sat across from each other, the same way we had all those years ago, but everything had changed. He looked tired. Grateful, maybe. He asked why I hadn't crushed them when I had the chance. I told him the truth. Success was never about vengeance. It was about becoming someone no one could erase. Then I said something that made him go still. Success isn't about getting even. Success is making them pay to relearn everything they once ignored in you. He nodded, but I was already walking away. I didn't need his approval. I had already built something better, something mine. And that was the real victory. Quiet, lasting, undeniable.